Well, when I had the camera, before I took the camera apart, I noticed that there was a bit of rattle, if you like, between these points and these points here. The door would rattle a bit on it. So I want to just squeeze these points together slightly. You don't need a tool to do that. Just give it a good lean with your thumb. That's probably moved it more than enough. So to get that in position, what I want to do is take a little spot of synthetic grease, put it on those pins top and bottom, because that's where the washer goes, the paper washer, the cartridge paper washer. And that grease serves two purposes. It sort of lubricates the pin a bit, but mostly it's great as an assembly grease to keep those paper washers in position while we're wriggling this onto the front of the camera. Alright, let's fit the door back to the camera. Extend the front. Make sure it's all latched in place. And take your door. Now you don't want to displace your paper washers. Need to hook the pin into that slot there. Stretch out the door and let it drop into at the top. So all I've done to that basically was squeeze these ends in before I fit the door back, and that was more than adequate. Now put the hinge pins in place. Just line up the slot, screw drops down there, make sure it lines up with the hole in the top of the door. Now I'm noticing here I've got some rattle. There's a bit of play in the door relative to the body casting. That's not desirable, and I'm going to deal with that by putting a very fine shim washer between the door and the base of the camera body there. So I'd better find one. Okay, well I've got some washers here. These are mostly washers that have come from Retina cameras. They're typically used to take the rattle out of the door on Retina 1A, 2As and any of the 3C series really. So what I'm just looking for is one that's about is reasonably thick. I'm going to try this one here. See if it pushes in easily. I think I could do with a thicker one than that. I can always use two thin washers if I have to. You can buy washers. Websites like AliExpress and that. You can often get things like that. Not really finding one as thick as I would like to use, which is not uncommon because typically when you're trying to get the rattle out of a door hinge, very commonly one thin washer will not do it. One thick one would. I've got two washers in here. Now the reason you want to take the rattle out of the door, get rid of that washer, put it back where it came from. Can't get under that with my tweezers. Just make sure that that's worked. Yeah, I've got no rattle there now. You take the rattle out of the door, because otherwise there's nothing really supporting the front standard, and when you press on the shutter release it might move the front standard up or down slightly, which means that you would have inconsistent point at which your shutter releases in terms of the travel of the shutter release, and you want things to be as consistent as possible. Okay, so we've got those in. I'll just check those screws again, make sure they're both tight. Now the damage on the leather at this point suggests that that screw had backed out at one stage, or that someone had pushed their screwdriver back past there in order to get to that screw. I could glue the leather back there now, but what we've got here is the door back on the camera. Should open and close neatly. Watch this bracket here. Can you see it? This bracket, this is the one that couples to your shutter. It's inclined to fall back into the body when you haven't got the shutter on, and that will block the action of being able to open and close the front easily. So watch that, and of course you can damage that lever if it gets caught. Alright, so the focus is good now. That action's good. I'll show you what happens and how the focus stops you being able to press the buttons and then release the front. In the infinity position, you'll see that this lever is free to move. I'll push them back out to the outside extent, and you see as I press on the buttons top and bottom, those levers move in, because the buttons can move because those levers are free to move. If we move the focus off the infinity position, now the buttons won't press in, and that's because they're being blocked. These levers can't move in. So that's what's intended to stop you from being able to fold the front of your camera without the focus being set back to infinity. And the reason that the manufacturer would want to do that was, in the close focus position, your lens and shutter are jacked right forward. They would scrape on the front of the camera, unless they'd made special arrangements for that with an extra big bump on the front of the camera, which would be undesirable. These were made to put in your pocket. So that's that. We've got that bit done. Let's get that lever flipped round out of the way. That's better. And we can get on to more reassembling of the body. Right, the rewind shaft. Let's get that back in place. So here's the inner shaft, here's the outer shaft with the fork on the end. Right, so apply some synthetic grease to this inner, especially around that little spring that's on the end, because that's going to be the part that rubs. Now it goes in this direction. You see the slot, see the spring at this end, that pushes in here. Slide that down past that spring, make sure that the slot is in line with it, and here's our little special screw. That goes in there. Okay, and that stops this from being able to pull out too far, which is all that we require of it. Let's put this in place. I'm taking some synthetic grease, lubricating the inside of the bush. Now one side of the bush has countersunk holes, so you know that side's up. That's where the screw heads will go. I'll feed the shaft in from there. Now to get it to pass this little clip, I've got to lift the clip slightly with the tip of my screwdriver. That's it. That's all that's required. And there's our shaft ready to go back on the camera body. Right, here's our rewind. 2 screws, hold that in place. Tighten those 2 screws up, and I'll spin that rewind button on there just to test the action. It's a definite 2-stage action. You can see that the knob rises to allow you to rewind the film, but the shaft hasn't pulled up. You pull the shaft up to get your film cassette in or out. But its normal parked position is there. This is down inside the film cassette. But the knob can go from its rest position up to this position to allow you good access to wind the film. Alright, we'll take that knob back off. That's that part. And start reassembling the film advance end. Well, the first thing I want to do here is put a little bit of lubrication on that little spigot there and on the top of that spring. That's where that rubs against our take-up spool. Now the take-up spool, the slots go upwards towards this end of the camera. The plain end goes downwards on there. So I'll just get that dropped into place like that, and we'll fit the shaft. Now on this particular camera we had a shim. That's a bit of an unusual thing. It probably means that when they were machining these castings, or when they were moulding the castings, that recess was deeper than it should have been. But I don't know that for sure. I'll take our bush and I'll rub some synthetic grease through the centre of that, where our advanced shaft will go. And you can tell which way up this thing goes because of the countersink. The shaft should engage the slots in the top of the film take-up spool. That's better. And 3 screws will hold this in place. Check that this moves freely. That feels good. Tighten the 3 screws. So that's our take-up spool. That's in place. That moves smoothly. Let's get our sprocket shaft in place. Okay, so let's just put a little bit of synthetic grease in the housing there at the top, and in the same position at the base of the camera. That's where that shaft is going to be rotating. Here's our shaft. Feeds in from the top. Now we need to get our pieces on there in the correct order. First we had a spacer washer. Then we had our sprocket. Then we had our roller. I'll just lead that into the hole in the bottom casting. Now I'm just pushing, holding my finger on the gear at the top, holding my finger against the sprocket here at the bottom, pushing it towards the top, and lift up that screw. That's just to take rattle and slack out of that situation there. And here that roller should be clear of the casting so it's not rubbing. Let's get our screws lined up in the same side for good measure. So there's our sprocket shaft. That's in, moves smoothly, nothing's rubbing. That'll be good. Now we need to put all the control stuff on the top. I think we can start with the little ratchets here. I'm just putting a little bit of grease underneath that. That should just fit down over the top there. It may be a snug press fit, that's okay. They don't need to be particularly hard. What have we got? We've got this shaft and this gear. I'm just going to put some synthetic grease into that gear. Now that sits right there from memory. Like that, so that this is coupled to our sprocket. So if I roll this sprocket with my thumb, you can see that this is coupled. I'll snug that screw up. That's working nicely. Here's our shutter release. Now I'm going to put a little wipe of synthetic grease in the centre of that and some on the shaft. That'll drop in here. That pin passes up through this point and stops the whole thing from rotating. So you've got to line this up. Flip that thing out of the way. I'm just checking that that lined up, and it did. That's working as it should. That's our shutter release. Good. And we'll swing that back out of the way because we've got other things to do here. On our film advance here, we have our advance rewind lever. Now I'm going to make sure I get this the right way up, otherwise we'll be in trouble. I'm pretty sure it goes that way up. And this piece here, I'm just putting a little bit of grease on the middle of that so that the thread is not over tight. And this was left-hand thread. Seems to move okay. That looks good. Of course, this was very tight when we started. It doesn't need to be that tight. I've got a better tool for doing this somewhere. That's good. There should be a little bit of friction on that so that this thing is pulled forward or pulled back as the film advances is turned. But that looks good. That's centered. It's all looking as it should do. The film advance knob actually just screws on the top there. Let's get the springs and levers in place next. Might pull that out in the meantime, just to make it easier for you to see what's happening here. We have two springs, and they look like that. This one goes at the front. This one goes at the back. But they do look pretty similar, so they're very easy to mix these two up. We have two screws which should be identical, and they are. One of them's going here, the one at the back's going right there, so I'll put that in place. If I can get my screw back again. A case of the clumsies today. That's better. Make sure that spring is free. That looks right. Nip that up. Let's put that other spring to one. No, we'll do the other spring now. And it's done. This spring sits like this. Alright, let's get our control gear in. Now we start with a plain washer that sits there. This lever goes on top of it. Now I'm just checking this because I think I mentioned earlier that the little pawl there looked a little bit damaged. I might just give that a touch with a file to put that back into something like the correct shape. I think that tip is, you probably can't even see it on here, but that tip is just not quite right. It's just a little bit blurred over. I just want to square it up so it engages neatly with the little ratchet teeth here and isn't sort of inclined to want to slip off. How things like this get damaged is quite easy. It's when people go to rewind the film without moving the lever across to the rewind position, which would disengage this. So this is holding back as hard as it can to stop the film from being rewound, and you get some clown turning on the knob at the other end. Something's going to give, and in this case that little point there is just a little bit misshapen. But I think a tap with a hammer and a couple of swipes with a file and it'll be as good as new. Okay, to make it a bit easier for you to see exactly what's happening here, I've just removed my advanced rewind lever. So let's go. Start with that plain washer then this lever. This spring has to be lifted onto the back of that lever to pull it into place. We'll do that after this is assembled. Then this washer. Then this lever. Then this lever. And if you're thinking that'd be a lot of fun trying to keep 3 levers and 2 washers all lined up with each other while you're trying to get things in place, you'd be right. That wants to fall over. That looks good. I'll nip that screw up. Now this spring at the back, you need to pull that out, swing it under the lever at the back, and then it acts against that pin there. Now see if we can get you a bit better focused than that. Yeah, you can see it, so it's acting on the back of that lever now. That's sprung loaded. That keeps the ratchet teeth in place. Well, that's not tight, so it's not dragging the ratchet around at the moment. Let's tighten that up. That's better. You can hear that ratchet sound. And as you go to move this backwards, that pawl drops in and it won't allow it to go backwards. Now, when this thing is in place, because we've removed this for the demo, it acts against this lever to pull this lever out of engagement to allow the shaft to rotate backwards. So that's how that works. Now at the front, this spring has to couple, see if I can get this, let's prop this up and get you better focused. This lever here has a little stud underneath the bottom of it, and that stud gets pulled forward by that spring, so it's got to be wiggled into position, and this is always somewhat awkward. The tip of the spring always wants to dive down the hole. So it doesn't want to get pushed underneath where we need to get it. That's it, that's it, that's it. So that acts to pull this piece forward, which would engage it with our shutter release, which we can pop back in place now, I suppose. Get that on the shaft, down in the camera. That's that, that's that, that's engaged. Alright. So what I'll do now is I'll put this piece back in place and we can have a demo of how that action all works. Okay, before I smother things with grease and make things impossible to see, basically I need to point out a few things. This wheel here, which is geared to this shaft at the back, which is our sprocket. So as the sprocket is turned, as the film is pulled through the camera, this gear rotates, and when it reaches a certain point, I'll get it around where you can see it, there's a little ramp here. And as that comes around, it reaches the point where it allows the point of this lever, can you see that? Yeah, the point of this lever to drop in. And then it pushes against the tip of that lever, forcing that lever back out of the way, like that, which allows you to depress the shutter release. And once that comes back up, the lever pops back out of its catch because it's got a spring pulling it forward and allows this shaft to rotate again. So that's all working smoothly. Our rewind, let's show you this. As the film's advancing, you can hear the ratchet. That ratchet sound is our anti-backup pull, the thing that stops you being able to pull the film backwards, working. Now, this is our lever here. If we pull that back into the rewind position, what it's done is it's pulled that shaft back out of the way, pulled the pull out of engagement with the shaft, which would allow this to roll round backwards, allow the film to be spooled back into the cassette. As soon as you move the film advance forward again, it drags this piece with it because there's a bit of friction there, which it re-engages the ratchet and therefore stops you being able to wind the film back into the cassette, which is of course what you want when you're advancing film. So that film advance mechanism is now working correctly. The only thing we don't have on here is the frame counter. I'm just checking these screws, make sure they're tight. I'm going to apply a little bit of synthetic grease while I've got it at this point. I want some between these gears here, some on that ramp that the little lever is going to pick up on. And that's probably about it. I could put some on the ratchet teeth, I suppose, that won't hurt. There are ratchet teeth in both directions because the other lever, this one here, that will lock the film advance. Alright, that's all looking good. Okay, so apart from the frame counter, that's complete. Our frame counter, of course, consists of 3 pieces. And these pieces, because this wasn't assembled correctly, that fits on like that. Let's put some synthetic grease in that. Put a little bit of grease on here. A little bit of grease on the inside where it revolves around this shaft. The spring should sit on the top like that. So this is our arrangement, and that sits up there like that, and it engages with this gear here, which is revolved by the sprocket moving inside the camera. And of course the sprocket is moved by the film being pulled through the camera, and the film has been pulled through the camera by our advance lever here, our advance knob. That's the body done. It just needs the top cover put back in place and the shutter put back in the camera. Oh, and the leather glued on the base of the camera. So let's just pop that to one side and inspect this top cover. Now this is our film reminder dial. I'm just lifting that up and feeling that it lifts up and you can rotate it. It drops back into position neatly. In other words, it is in good condition and doesn't need to be played with. The accessory shoe here, the 3 screws are snug. That one wasn't. The shoe's not mutilated. We don't need to disturb it. The viewfinder. The viewfinder's a bit dusty looking, inside and out, so we should clean that. That's a bit entertaining. So a single screw will hold this cover in place. The cover will lift off, and in here we have this spring arrangement which holds the lenses in position and our lenses. Now the front one, let's get that out. Can go either way up. Plain side to the outside, concave side to the inside. Our rear glass, let's have a look at that. This is plain on one side, slightly convex on the other side. The convex side goes inwards, the plain side goes outwards. And here's the little spring clip that holds them in place. You can see that there's a hint of corrosion on it at that point. I'll give that a wipe with some solvent. That paint will fall off, and then I'll just get a black marker pen and run it over the bald spot so it's nice and black, and that'll be as good as gold. So there's nothing really much to do here. I'll clean the top housing with a bit of naphtha on a cotton bud. The marks that are in it, they're not really moving, and that's because they are scratches or corrosion or something of that nature. They're not loose dirt. I'll wipe the rest of the top cover just to make sure that anything that will come off does come off. But the top cover generally looks quite clean, which well, the whole camera looks relatively clean. Its only real problem was that corrosion and dust and dirt. So I'll just give that a wipe to remove that paint that's loose over that little spot of corrosion. I'll give that a scrape. I think that's lumps don't want to come off. Yeah, it's a bit crusty. Alright, let's find a marker pen. Well, that's all that's required really. All we wanted to do was blacken that so that there are no bright patches inside the finder, and bright patches inside the finder would tend to provide you with a finder with slightly less contrast than otherwise. Our two pieces of glass here, well, they're plain pieces of glass. There's nothing flash about them. They don't have a coating. I'll just clean these with a bit of domestic glass cleaner and a cotton handkerchief, and we'll put this back together. Okay, let's get this back together. So we'll start with our rear lens. Now one side is very slightly convex, that goes to the inside. I'll prop this up on something so it's not falling back and causing us grief. Here's our front lens, nice and clean. Now that goes either way up, it's not sided. I'll just take that and the spring and lower that into the frame. I don't particularly like that, that's a bit rattly. So what I think I'll do is I'll take that out, I'll bend the pins on this outwards a bit to provide a bit more tension. How would it get in that state? Well, the usual culprit is someone has pressed on the front or the rear lens when they've been cleaning it, and in doing so they have pushed the glass back against this thing here, which isn't very strong. It's pretty spindly looking. And that leaves it loose and rattly. You want to get that rear glass is a bugger to keep in place. That's it this time. We have it in place. Make sure that rear glass is centered as much as possible. The front glass is sitting good. Now I'll take my rocket blower, make sure there's no dust on the inside. Now I'm looking at the state of the glass to make sure I didn't leave any fingerprints on the inside surface. Our frame goes back over the top. And the single screw that holds it in place. Give that front glass a quick wipe to make sure that it's all clean and that I didn't leave any fingerprints in there. No, that's good. And when I look through that, that's a nice clean piece of glass now, that's good. And of course this can go back on the camera. So I'm just going to remove the advanced knob, because that's not down tight, that's relatively loose. Getting this in place. This is always a bit entertaining. This is how you do it. What you want to do is roll the sprocket wheel forward until it disengages the shutter. And that will allow you to depress the shutter release button and get this in place. Now that slot needs to go over our lever at the back there. The shutter release button is being depressed. And what am I catching? Oh, the catch at the other end of the body, and that sits on there. Shutter release button pops back up. Everything's looking good. Advanced knob goes on the top. Two screws hold our top cover in place. One at this end of the body. One at the other. The advanced knob, I'm using my spanner again to engage the flats on the advanced shaft, and I can rotate the knob in the direction of the arrow this time to tighten it up. Our film advance is tight. As we roll the sprocket shaft forward, locks the film advance. You can press the shutter release and you can do it again and again. Let's put the rewind knob in position. Spin that into position. Put the tail of my tweezers into the fork to stop it rotating. Tighten the knob. Here's our rewind. All back in place. So the camera body is just about dealt to. But I better glue the leather back. So anything that's loose here on the leather, I'll just remove that dried adhesive. I just want this to lie flat, so it's not important that I remove all the lumps and bumps exactly, because the positive here will match with the negative here. But I don't want loose bits that might fold over and cause a problem. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So where's my adhesive? And my piece of paper. Alright, I'll get some glue out on my piece of paper. And my piece of paper I will try and keep out of the picture as far as I can, because otherwise the meter sees it and the meter says, oh gosh, it's bright in here. I better just use a smaller aperture. And then you can't see the camera because the camera is as black as sin as cameras tend to be. Right, so I just want to get my adhesive neatly spread on the leather. And at this end, just got to run that round underneath the leather that we haven't got floating because it's not convenient. Okay, that's in place. Let's pop the leather back down. Make sure it's pressed down firmly. Now, any glue squeeze out, you shouldn't really be getting any, but if you do, just wipe it off while it's liquid and you should be as good as gold. That looks good. Lens and shutter next, I think. Okay, so what do we need to do here? We need to make sure that this is flipped up so that we can drop our shutter release shaft in there. Here's our shutter assembly, which has been all cleaned and serviced because we did that in the earlier videos. Not necessarily on this shutter that you saw, but I certainly did do the shutter at the same time. Let's flip the camera over. Drop my retaining ring in, the notches side towards me. Otherwise, if you do manage to get it started, you'll have a terrible job getting it back off again. See if I can get my tool to engage with that. That's better. That just very lightly snugged up because we've got to get this adjusted yet. Now the adjustment, the position. Where does it need to be? Well, the tell is this. Here's our focus, our mark here for our focus, and that should line up with that line on the infinity position when the the focus is right round at the infinity position, so it needs to be right there. Right there. So I need to hold this firmly, get the tool in here, and snug that thing up. And check that I was successful, and I haven't moved anything. I have moved something. I've rotated the shutter all the way around here. So I'm going to have to loosen that, have another go. Now, commonly with cameras, they will have a pin on the back of the shutter which locates the shutter in one fixed position so that the retaining ring's not doing all the work. It's retaining it, not fixing it in position. With the Retinas, they didn't do that for some bizarre reason. And so it means you need to get this adjusted correctly. Let's have a look, see where we are. No, I've moved it again. See if I can pull that back. See if I can snug that up. Yep, that's it. That's us. That's in the right position. So if we cock the shutter, advance the film, roll the sprocket forward, the shutter releases. What haven't we got on here? Two things. We haven't got the shutter release button on the top of the camera. And I wanted a little piece of leather on there, didn't I? So I didn't tighten. That's the one I want. So I don't make a mess of it. That's good. And something else. Something I've done wrong. Let's get that rewind knob off. Put that little collar on the top. Put our rewind knob back on. Do it up. That's better. It even feels smoother. Should have done it right the first time. Everything's just about dealt to. What are we left with? Tidying up the leather a little bit. It's lost a bit of its colour. I'm just going to do this with a bit of just leather polish, just like shoe polish. I've got a nice cream which is very heavily pigmented, and that'll just blacken up some of these brown patches here. Well, I think that's it. Here's our camera. Nice, clean, tidy. Good tripod socket. The shutter and lens, of course, had already been cleaned on a previous occasion, so I don't need to do those. And it's all working. It's nice. So, this camera would have been made sort of 1950-ish, I would imagine, somewhere around there. So, that's an old camera now, 75 years old. But there'd be nothing wrong with the photos that come from this. Anyway, thanks for watching.